Hello, everybody. Welcome on this Monday evening. Today, we are going to be talking about engaging our students in text. My name is Scott, and you're watching Immediate Immersion Live, and I'll be right back with you. And welcome back. How's everybody doing this evening? Let me know in the chat if you are a returnee by typing in hashtag returnee, or are you a newbie? This is your first time watching us here at Immediate Immersion Live. Type in hashtag newbie. Today, we are going to be talking about our third in our series of Back to Basics, and we're going to be talking about reading, engaging students in text. If at any time you find that this information is useful to you, please click the like and subscribe. It helps us get out to more people. We're encroaching up on the 500 subscribers, and I'm looking forward to hitting that milestone for myself, so thank you very much. And welcome Carmen. Carmen is a newbie. It's her first time watching us. All of our previous lives, this is episode number 18 since we started going live, are available on our YouTube channel, so you can watch any of the replays for any of the interested topics you may have. So welcome, Carmen. So first of all, let's talk about why. Why is reading important? Sorry, still recovering from my, it seems like month-long illness. It makes me very, very thirsty, so I apologize. So reading. According to Stephen Krashen, 70% of our knowledge in any language comes from what we read. And it doesn't necessarily matter what we read, but reading is chock full of examples of how the language works. It's got vocabulary in context, grammar rules in context. It shows how to make short sentences, medium sentences, long sentences. All of these things are exemplified in reading, in the text. And it doesn't matter whether you're reading an advertisement, or you're reading a short story, or an email, or a longer piece like a novel or an article. All of that gives us information about how the language works, which is so very important. And we know for comprehension-based instruction that students need input, but just not any input. They need input that they can understand. But if that input is always at the level of understanding, there is no room for growth. So Stephen Krashen also told us about you need the input plus a little bit more. You need some room for them to grow. So he calls this input plus one. So we don't want it always to be at this level. We want to be able to push it just a little bit so it's slightly above their level, so there's room to grow. And when they reach that new level of understanding, then we can slowly move it up a little bit more. And that's how you increment. No matter what the input is, whether it's be text-based or oral-based, it needs to be at their level plus a little bit more to help them grow. If it's only at their level, there's not going to be any growth there. Just like an athlete, if they always try to maintain their best time and never try to improve it, there's never going to be any growth there. You've got to be able to push yourself. And with reading is the text is the stepping stone to being able to write. So the more written input that students get, that they understand, with a little bit of level difficulty in there for them, allows them to grow not only their reading comprehension, their vocabulary base, and their knowledge of how the language works syntactically and grammatically, but it also is a stepping stone for them to write, because their reading comprehension will be here, their writing ability will be here, but as they're going through, they're going to go ahead and learn how to make those sentences. Welcome, Bernadette. She's a returnee from British Columbia. Welcome, welcome from our friends up north. Probably quite cold there. It's a little colder for us here, too. We were hitting the low 60s today. So reading is important because it allows kids to understand at their pace. Unlike oral input, where it comes at them at the pace of the speaker, they don't have the opportunity to slow that down. With text, they can read at any speed they wish, whether they might be slower processors or fast processors. And it's important, just like an oral input, that we include examples of short, medium, and long sentences. For our slowest of processors, they're only going to understand those shortest of sentences. But when we repeat the same information in medium and in longer sentences, it gives them room to grow. Welcome, Catalina. She's also a returnee. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So we want to always expose. We want to have short, we want to have medium, we want to have long sentences in there. Our medium and our longer sentences always contain the same information as the short sentences, with a little bit more that isn't necessary to understand the whole context. If they only understand the short sentences, they will get the majority of what they need to understand. So that's important. But for those kids who are only understanding the shorter sentences, by having medium sentences in there, it gives them room to grow. So once they're understanding all these short sentences, they can now move up to these medium sentences, which contain very little, if any, new information. They're just longer sentences. And then those that are comprehending the medium sentences have room to grow with the longer sentences. One of the things people always say to me is, my kids are always speaking in short, choppy sentences. And I say, well, are you exposing them to medium and longer sentences? And usually the answer is no. So if you want your kids to be able to come up with those medium and longer sentences, you have to expose them to those sentences, both orally and textually, so that they have like a stepping ladder to be able to grow. And even though they're not ready for those longer sentences, they're seeing them exemplified over and over and over again in context, which is really important. That's why reading text-based instruction is the best way to teach new vocabulary and new grammatical syntaxes, so they can see them, how they actually work, because there's no grammatical rule that explains exactly how that piece of grammar works in the language. The only way to be able to truly understand it is to see it breathing, living in text. And obviously oral text as well, but it's easier to point it out, slow it down, stop, look at it, examine it when it's fixed on the page rather than when it's coming in through your ears. So that's why reading is so very important. It is the stepping stone to being able to write in the language, and it allows for maximum absorption of vocabulary and grammar. And we know this with our kids in our classroom in their native languages. The more avid readers have better vocabulary and better handling of grammar than do our students who don't read as much. So we know this instinctually as teachers, but here we're just highlighting it to make sure it is completely obvious. So next, let's talk about the process of how we read. It doesn't matter what the text is. We follow these basic processes to get kids to be able to understand the reading. So at the very basic level, for our very novice readers, we're going to follow 3 steps. The teacher is going to read a chunk in the target language. The students are going to chorally translate that chunk into the common language. And then third, the class is going to discuss that chunk in the target language. So let me break that down for you. And again, this is for our really novice readers. So first of all, the teacher needed to determine what size chunk is best for their students. Is that chunk a sentence at a time? Is that chunk 2 or maybe 3 sentences? Is it a paragraph? Or is it a whole page? And I probably wouldn't chunk it any bigger than a page. And the teacher is going to read that text. The kids are going to have a copy of that text in their hands. They can follow along. And as long as it's not a novel, they can write little notes as they go along if they need to. But also you want to have that same text projected on the board. Now, if it's a text you've written, you can use that just by projecting it. But if it is a novel, you can't change the format of the novel. So you can use like a, now I'm trying to forget what they're called. Elmo is the name brand of them. But they are kind of like a digital overhead projector. And you can open up the book, and it's a little camera that will project onto your screen whatever's underneath it. So it doesn't just work for books. You can project anything underneath there, but it works really, really well. A document projector, that's the word I was looking for. So you can get one of those, and I bought one pretty cheaply, around $100, I think, on Amazon. And it works really well. It folds up, and then I just plugs into my computer when I want to use it, and I can use 2 paper clips with a string attached on the other side. So the paper clips go and hold it, and the string keeps them together and will keep the book open like this so that we can read it while I go along. So that's a way to project your books. And so then you want to have it projected, and the kids have a copy of it, and then you, the teacher, want to read it. Why do you want to read it rather than students read it? A couple of reasons. We want the kids to be able to hear the best pronunciation as possible. And you can provide that better than your students can. 2, when students are trying to read it out loud, especially in a language they don't fully understand or aren't fully fluent in, they can't do 2 things at once. They can either pronounce the sentences or they can understand the sentence, but they usually can't do both at the same time. So they may read 2 or 3 sentences but have no recollection or what those sentences meant. And another problem is it's painfully slow if a student is not adept at reading, even in their own language. It can be painfully slow and painfully embarrassing for the student. So to eliminate all of that, the teacher reads it, because this is not a pronunciation exercise. Remember, students get what they get pronunciation-wise from hearing you speak the language. That's where they pick up pronunciation. It's the same way babies pick up the pronunciation of their original language. Parents don't go around them having them repeat after them to get the pronunciation properly. They just talk to them, and then they eventually pick up the pronunciations for each sound. My kids do that so well. I speak with a Spanish with a Castilian accent, so my C's and Z's have a TH sound in English. And so a lot of my kids who aren't really adept at spelling and haven't picked up the sound with the letter yet will spell words as they hear me say them, because their pronunciation is so good that they're starting to spell like native speakers. So I will get to your question in just 1 second, Carmen. They'll start spelling like native speakers who don't know how to read. So like I say cada, which means each in Spanish. It is spelled with a D, but it's not a hard D like we have in English. It's a softer D that sounds a little bit like TH in English. So my kids will often spell it as C-A-T-H-A. So that tells me they're picking up the pronunciation by way of listening, and they don't need to practice pronunciation. Carmen asks a question. Let's put it up here on the screen. Do you recommend the audios that come with the novels? Can you explain why you recommend projecting the book if the students have a copy of that book? Yes, I haven't got to that point, Carmen, so I will get there, and then I'll talk about the audios. Those are great questions. So the reason why you want to project it while they have it in their hands, some kids like to look at it in their hands, some like to look at up on the board. But when I'm reading it, I am pointing at the words as I'm saying the words. So for example, let me put Carmen's question back up. If this were the text that we were reading on the screen, hello, come back up. Why doesn't it want to come back up? There it goes. Okay. So I will be going and I will point. Do you recommend the audios that come with the novels? And I do this so that my students can associate the letters, the spelling, the words with the sounds that come out of my mouth. And so I am pointing as I'm saying each of the words so my kids can start to associate sounds with spelling. This is much easier for kids to do when the language is phonetic. So German, Spanish, Italian, that's the extent of my languages that I know that are phonetic. I don't speak a lot of languages. I speak French, Spanish, German, and English. I think that's all of them. And so I know which ones are phonetic there. French is not a phonetic language. The sounds and the letters don't match up. So it's extremely important, even more so important for them to be able to see how those words are spelled compared to how they are pronounced. And so that's why I want to have it displayed up there. If they're just reading it in their hands, they can't see me pointing at the words as I pronounce them. Also, I can point to the word and ask them if it's a word that I know they don't know. I want to point out what that word is. And I'm going to say, that word means blah, 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 blah. So they can see it, they can point it out, they can hear me pronounce it, they can see how it's spelled, and then I can tell them the meaning. So great question. Then the second part of her question, do you recommend the audios that come with the novels? That depends. Some of them are better than others. The ones that are done professionally, they have professional voice actors, yes, I do recommend them. I don't recommend them in place of reading the novel, meaning I don't want them to use it like an audiobook where they are looking at the words and hearing it that way. I will use it. Sorry, so thirsty. I will use it either as an introduction to the chapter, meaning I'll have them listen to the chapter without the text at all. So they're just focusing on listening. Because again, these are second language learners. They can't multitask in the language at all. And we can barely do it in our own languages. So I want them to focus on listening and not have a book in front of them. So then I'll do that as an introduction. They'll hear the chapter, and then I'll go back and teach the chapter. Or if I know that particular chapter was a particularly difficult chapter, then I might teach the chapter first and then present them with the chapter from the audio that comes with it. So now I know they'll understand it. So it depends on the chapter. If it's an easier chapter, I'll use the audio to introduce the chapter because there's a good chance they'll be able to understand the audio on its own. But if the chapter is more complicated, more difficult, then I'm going to teach that chapter, and then I'm going to review that chapter by having them listen to the audio. But again, when they're listening to the audio, that's what they're doing. So the text goes away so they can focus on that. So very excellent question, Carmen. Thank you for asking that. So that's the first step. Whatever that chunk is, teacher reads it, pronounces it to the best of their ability, and points to each word as they enunciate. Second, we have the kids chorally translate. You are so welcome, Carmen. You want kids to chorally translate. Now, why chorally? Because I don't want to embarrass any kids. So when it's everybody trying to translate at the same time, some kids can hide in that. And so if they're not completely adept at translating what there's going on, they can hide in it. And they're not being embarrassed in any way. So that's really important. Now, there are two ways to do it. I like to do it word for word, literal translation, meaning they're not putting it into proper syntax in the language they're translating to. So, for example, in my class, they would be translating to English. They are not trying to put it into everyday English. They already know how to speak English, and this is not an exercise in translation. This is only an exercise in comprehension. The whole reason we're translating in the first place is to make sure that every kid understood the chunk that we read before we start to discuss it. If you're not sure if they understood it, meaning you skip this step and you start asking questions, then you're going to kids go, I don't understand what you're talking about. I don't understand what you just read. So this way we eliminate that step by making everybody chorally translate. Now, as I said, I'm in the school of chorally translating word for word, literally. Other people like to have it in everyday English. Everyday English is harder to do because not only they got to figure out what the words mean, then they've got to rearrange the syntax into their common language and then come out with that. That's a lot to do. I think there are more benefits with translating it literally word for word. Number one, they get to feel how the syntax is different. I can sit all day and try to explain how, in Spanish, the adjectives come after the nouns, or in German, main verbs come in second position of main clauses, or at the end of the sentence in subordinate clauses. I can say those kinds of things until I'm blue in the face. I can say certain adjectives in French come before while other ones come after. But the kids don't really understand that. But if they're translating in Spanish, the dog Brown jumped quickly over the bush big, they're starting to feel that syntax in how the Spanish words are put together and how they contrast with that of the common language. Or in German, the big dog is fat because he a lot eats. That's how the sentence would go in German, and the kids can start to feel that. I can tell them all in subordinate clauses, even if the kids understood what a subordinate clause was, that the verb goes at the end, but they're going to forget. And it's not like they're going to forget doing it this way either, but over and over with every passage that we read, they're getting a feeling for the syntax, and the rhythm and the order of the syntax is getting subliminally put into the brain, into the subconscious part of the brain. So that's why I like to do it literally word for word. So when we're chorally translating, I again will point to the words in the target language, and I am silent, and my kids are then telling me what each word means as I point to it. That helps them stay together. And then anytime I feel a micro hesitation that they don't know this word, I give it to them right away. So I don't make anybody feel uncomfortable. There's a slight hesitation, boom, I give it to them. Or if I already know they don't know that word, I'm going to give it to them right away without even allowing them to think about it for a second. Because I don't want them to feel uncomfortable, because this is not an assessment piece. I'm not trying to assess if they understood the text. I'm making sure that everybody does understand the text because we are translating it. And then the third step in this process is the discussion. So especially at the novice level, we're just asking questions: who, what, when, where, how about the text. The concrete questions, the questions they can find the answers directly in the text. And this is how we discuss it. And this is in the target language. I'm asking the questions in the target language, and students are answering in the target language. So we're working with this text. As the texts get more complex and my ability and my students increases, I might ask some other, maybe thematic type questions or deeper questions that the answer might not be directly found in the text. So about themes or problems or conflicts or things that come up that would pertain to that text but aren't necessarily directly found in the text. An example would be in Brandon Wants a Dog. Brandon finds this dog that his parents said he could not have. He could not have a dog. He finds a stray dog, or what he thinks is a stray dog, in the park, and he takes it home. And he sneaks it into his bedroom, and he's hiding it from his parents. So at the beginning of this novel, my kids are really at the novice level. It's a level 1 novel that we read, and we read it generally about now in the school year. November, December is when we start it. So my kids have about 3.5 months of language behind them. They can understand the book. It's pretty simple. So we'll start by just asking the concrete questions, but eventually I'm going to start asking questions like, is it okay to keep secrets from your parents? Is it okay to lie to people? So those thematic types of things that we can talk about, but still keeping it simple because my kids are still at the novice level. So those are the main 3 steps of addressing a text, teaching a text. Teacher reads chunk, students corally translate chunk, and then class discusses chunk. But that can get old, especially once your kids start moving towards the novice high to the intermediate low level. And so how I mix that up is I still read the chunk. Catalina, I'll address your question in just one moment. I will still read my chunk in the target language, still pointing to the words. And as I go, I will translate words that I know they don't know. After I do that, I will ask, are there any questions about that text? Like, is there any part of that text you don't understand? I'll answer those, and then we will discuss it in the target language. So the part that I'm skipping, and it's not really skipping, I'm just modifying how I'm doing it, is the choral translation, because that can get really, really old. So once I know they're beyond this point, I translate what I know they don't know, and then I ask questions. Is there any part of what I just read that you don't understand? Letting kids know it's perfectly okay you don't understand it. I'm just trying to make sure it's all clear for everybody before we start discussing it. And that will speed up the process and make it a little bit less tedious. So Catalina asked, do you read every day and for how long? So it depends, Catalina, what I'm reading. If I'm reading an extended story that we are working with, then I just read till it's finished. So it may take a day, it may take 2 days, it really takes 3 days. If we're reading a little bit longer piece of a text, again, I will continue reading it until I'm finished. When we're in a novel, the old way that I used to do it when I first started teaching 20 years ago, the way Blaine Ray prescribed doing, is that you read a chapter a week on Fridays. Oh boy, was that awful. That was awful. The reason it was awful, it was slow. So it took us sometimes 6 months to read a novel. Because if the novel was 10, let's say it was 10 chapters, at the very minimum, if you could finish a chapter a week, you were reading for 10 weeks straight. And because 4 days plus a weekend happened in between, kids often forgot what was going on. And they seemed distantly removed. And so it was painstakingly. I remember we used to do this with Pobre Ana. Not a very long book, but we'd start it like in the second week of school because my level ones could start it at that point. We'd still be reading it at Christmas time. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, if I hear Anna's name one more time, I'm going to cry. So now I stop everything. And when I do a novel, we do the novel almost daily until we're finished with it. So now, let's say, for example, like we're my Spanish 2s, we started a novel the week before we went away for Thanksgiving break. So on Mondays, I have my conversation days just like anything else. Normally in my lesson plan, then we would go to stories after that, and then a reading of a text after that. When we're in the novel phase, I stop the asking of the story, and I stop the reading of the text because we're reading a novel. So Mondays are still my my conversation days. We read the novel as far as we can get in those using those 3 steps or the modified steps, Tuesday through Thursday, and then Friday we do a write and discuss where we review and write down the chapter. So I'll ask questions about the chapter, kind of leading questions, so we can kind of review the chapter. And I write down the sentences, and the kids copy it down in their notebooks. And we continue that schedule until we finish the novel, however long it takes. Some novels on average take me a month to 6 weeks, depending. And each class is different. Some classes read faster than others. And then there's a longer book, like I know we read Todo lo que brilla in my Spanish 3 at the end of the year. And that one's a long book. It's the longest book we read as a class in the 3 years that I have them in the middle school. And it takes us almost 9 to 10 weeks to read that. It's also a much more difficult book than the book that we read earlier in the year, which is La vida y muerte en la Mara Salvatrucha, which is Spanish-wise, the text is easy, but the concepts, the themes in it are really heavy. So it takes us long to get through those themes, but not through the language. Each chapter is like 2 pages at the most. But Todo lo que brilla is a much more complex language-wise novel. The concepts that are not that difficult to understand. So it's vice versa here. But I do it for as long as it takes, but I do follow that general schedule where conversations on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday we read, and then Friday we do the review in a write and discuss where I'm asking questions. What happened first? What happened second? Who did what? Why did they do it? We write down the sentences together. Bernadette says, I totally agree. Just finished a CI novel, Une Disparition Mystérieuse, with students. Read it almost daily. Students were more engaged and saw improvement in their writing skills. Yes, absolutely. And so it's just what phase I'm in. And when I'm done with the novel, I go back to my normal conversation, story, reading, conversation, story, reading, conversation, story, reading, until we get to the next novel phase. We at our school, we read 2 novels a year. We read the first trimester, we're building language. Second trimester, which starts for us the first week of November, we start reading our novel. We usually finish that novel either right at winter break or just after, like 1 or 2 weeks after winter break. And then our second trimester goes until the end of February, about the 3rd week of February. So then we'll do language, language, language from that January to that February point. Then we start our second novel at the start of the third trimester. When we finish that, then we go language, 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 language. So that's kind of how we do it at our school. Great observation, Bernadette. Thank you. So there's one other way that I also like to read, and I reserve this mainly for my level 3s. Depending how strong my 2s are, I might do it at the end of the year, my second novel for my 2s. But I will start reading a novel, and I'll read 1 to 3 chapters with the class. And that's to get them into the novel. Then starting with chapter 4, they're going to pair up with another student. They're going to read the chapter together in English. So that means they're going to live translate with each other. They figure out how they want to do it. Do they want to do it sentence by sentence or paragraph by paragraph or page by page? But they work with a pair. After that chapter is read, we come back together as a group and we discuss it in the target language. Then, for the 5th chapter, they're going to read it independently on their own. And then when we come back together, I ask them if they have any questions about the text, and then we start discussing it in the target language. Then the 6th chapter, we read together as a class. Then we discuss. Then 7 will be pairs, 8 will be individual, and then 9 will be class, and then pairs, and then individual until the book is over. But remembering after every chapter, we're coming back together as a class to make sure it's understood and that we discuss it in the target language. So that's an alternative way once their reading ability is pretty good. And then the 4th way that I sometimes do this, and generally I only reserve this for my mature classes, and again would be like the second novel of the year. So towards the end of the year, I know the classes well, and I do not offer this to every class, but I will say how many kids want to read with me doing the novel, how many kids would like to read in a small group, how many kids would like to read in pairs, and how many kids would like to read on the book on their own. So in that way, everybody does their own thing. So I'll have a small group with me and we're reading the book together. I'll have other little pods around the room who are reading in maybe small groups or pairs. And then I have another group who are reading individually. Again, I'm assigning one chapter at a time. And at the end of that chapter, we come back together and we discuss. So this gives them a little bit of free choice. Where are they most comfortable in reading? Do they feel more comfortable independent reading with another partner in a small group? Or do they not feel confident at all and want to be read with me? Doesn't matter. We're all getting the same content. It's just coming at different ways. And then we come back together as a class and we discuss it. So those are the ways that I generally like to read a text. And obviously the latter ones are for, the longer text, your novels, not so much your shorter text, whether it's an article or a short story or an extended reading. Any of those, I follow the, first or second method, the 3 steps or the modified 3 steps to read. Great questions coming through. Thank you so much. And let's go ahead and now talk about what to read. So what to read? There are lots of things that you can read. You can take stories that you came up with in class and you can write them down and you can read those. You can also create readings specifically for your class and read those. You can find interesting articles and read those. Sometimes you can find them in, looking on the internet, looking for simplified. If you're Spanish, it's a little bit easier. We're always easier to find. things, there is a website called News ELA. And I use the free version, but they have paid versions. You get more features. But what's great about it, they have articles in English and Spanish. So if you're teaching English as a second language or Spanish, you can find interesting articles, and you can change these articles based on the level of reading of your students. So the content doesn't change, but the sentences will be longer or shorter depending on the way you scaffold it. You choose the level, and it will rewrite the article for you, and you can use that. So that works really, really well. Or you can just go and find articles that are interesting, and then you can gloss them yourself to make them more comprehensible for students. Or you can take the article, obviously referencing the source, and you can rewrite the article, simplifying the article for the level of your students. It's a great way to get some authentic resources in for students and exposing them to some of these from either magazines, websites, newspapers. You can subscribe to those kinds of things from places like Teachers Discovery and other sources like that. But generally, I find a lot of those articles are more difficult than they say they are for the kids that they're addressing. So I like to find my own if possible. And then, of course, novels. Children's books is another thing you can do to read, but I like to read those to my students because although they're written for children, they're difficult for second language learners. They assume a lot of vocabulary that the kids just don't know, but native speakers would have been exposed to. If it's written for like a kindergartner, then they've already had 5 years of language exposure of all waking hours. And our kids don't have that. Our kids in level 1 have approximately 180 hours or less. That's if you teach 5 days a week, an hour a day, and there are no interruptions whatsoever. That's 180 hours a year. That's not a lot. So they're difficult. So I use those as read alouds, and I'll read aloud to my students with those types of books. But that's also another thing that you can read. You can also take, when you have students do quick writes at any time, you can choose ones that you think are more interesting, retype those up, fixing all the errors, put them in a protective sleeve, and you can add them to your class library or use them as reading material as well. And if you save those from year after year after year after year, you kind of have your own little anthology that is on your free reading library, as well as stuff that you can read in class. So those are the things that I like to read in my classroom with my students, and works really, really well. And something I forgot to even mention as we're talking about reading, I don't know why I forgot about this, but one of the main things I do in my classroom is silent reading. So at least 2, 3, and sometimes 4 days a week, we read for a period of time. I have a library in my classroom of these novels, the novels that are written for second language learners. They are the comprehension-based novels. I have a library of them, and I have students choose a book, and then they read that book during our time. I start my level 1s out at 3 minutes, and I slowly add the time in. My level 2s and my level 3s are currently at 7 minutes right now. We were at 5 minutes, but a lot of kids were asking for more time to read, so I've given them 7 minutes to read. My kids don't know how long they read for. They just know they read until the timer goes off. I also read during this time, which is really important. You want to model. It's not time to do attendance or to check emails or do any of that stuff. I don't start the timer. My kids start reading when they walk in and the bell rings. I take attendance, and then I start the timer. So if my timer is set for 5 minutes, The kids are actually probably reading for closer to 6 because it takes me a minute to get through my attendance. And then I get my book out and the timer starts. The pure time is when I'm also reading. And it's really important. This gives them some independent reading, self-selected reading, meaning they don't get to choose whether or not they read, but they do get to choose the level of book and which book they want to read. And so I don't care if they're a level 3 and they're reading a pre-level 1 book. I don't care about that. I just want them to be reading. So that's another key component. My kids know that reading is important, and so they know they have to do it a lot to be able to get the gains they want. So those are the types of readings that I do. I follow my normal lesson plan schedule of conversations, stories, text. Conversation, story, text. Conversation, story, text. We generally read at least 2, if not 3 times a week for silent reading as their warm-up. So generally I do Tuesdays and Thursdays and sometimes Fridays. If I think they need more time, I'll add in Wednesdays as well. If I see that I'm getting less engagement, I'll take some reading time away and I will bring it back down to 2 days. It just depends. But I generally don't go down less than 2 days because it is important for them. And the last thing I want to talk about is reading activities. There are so many activities that you can do with reading. There's an actual website called Textivate. It's a paid website, but it chunks up text. It allows the kids to put the text back in order. They can do all sorts of things with the text from this website. I don't generally use it. The cost was fair, but I didn't use it enough to justify the cost for me. So I didn't use that as much. But I do scramble up text and have them put it back in order. I have them do that quite often. I use a site for assessment called formative.com, which allows me to do that. I can put the text in, and then they can drag and drop the text into the right order to make the story happen. That's one activity I like to do. Something I learned from La Maestra Loca, Annabelle Williamson, just a couple months ago, is called stoplight reading. And I love this activity. I have fallen in love with it, and my kids like it too. So traditionally, you give them a text on a piece of paper, and then they use 3 highlighters or colored pencils, green, yellow, and red, and they mark up the text. So they'll mark up the sentence green if they understood it with no difficulties. Yellow if they understood it, but it took some difficulties to get through it. And red means they didn't understand it. And they go through the whole text doing this. And what you're left with is you can see really quickly how much that particular student understood and where the trouble spots were. And as a class, you can see, are there a lot of commonalities where the trouble spots were that you can address as a class? Now, I don't have enough colored markers or highlighters in the 3 main colors. So what I did is I made a Google Doc, and my learning management system will make a copy of that doc for all of my students. And it will submit that all back to me with their name on it. So then they open up the doc, and then they will use the highlighter tool in Google Docs to highlight each sentence red, yellow, or green. So it works the same way. It's just digital. And I really like that because I can see it right in my, I can just scroll through all my students and see. I click this kid's name, and right next to it is the document, and I can see how much they understood. Next one, again. Third one, and I can go really, really quick. I really, really, really like this. So I'm even thinking about doing it for a chapter or 2 of the novels. So I may take a Xerox copy of 1 or 2 chapters from the novel and have them highlight it as individual readers just to kind of see where they're at before we then translate it and discuss it. So that I really, really like doing that. Another activity is what Michelle Whaley and Lori Clark came up with called, now I just lost my word. My English words disappear from me all the time. Embedded readings. And I love this activity as well. And you can do it either starting from a story or working backwards from a story. And I'll tell you when to use each one. If I'm writing a story, it's starting from the story, from the beginning. So I'll write it with just 5 short, choppy sentences. So they've got the beginning, the middle, and the end. The whole story is right in there. And then I'll make a second version. And this is where the word embedded comes in. I'm not just adding text to the beginning or the end, but I'm embedding sentences and words within the text I already have to extend it to make it a little bit bigger. And I might do it again and again. So I might have 4 or 5 versions where the most simplified to the original complex version that I want. And the reason we do this, it's scaffolded reading. So if I were to give that big, full text to my slower processors, they're going to shut down saying I can't do it. But if I give them the first one, and then they read that and they go, I got it. Their confidence is up. I go, okay, if you got this one, here's one with 20 more words. I know you can do it. And it's the same story. It's just got 20 additional words embedded in what they already read. That can do that. And then I go, here's a new one. It's got only 20 more words until I get them to the full version. It's kind of like how you teach kids to swim. And if the kids really knew what you were doing, they'd think you're cruel. Where you start at the shallow end and you go, just swim to me. And you're like only a foot away from them. But as they get closer, you move away, and then you move away, and you move away until they've swam across the entire length of the pool. That's what we're doing here. So you can do this and give them one version at a time. Or what I like to do is staple all of the versions together in one packet and tell them to choose the first version where it starts to get difficult for them. So skip over the easy ones and get me to the first one where you can understand it, but it takes a little bit of work. And you are going to put a star on that one because that's the one you started with. And then you're going to go and read from that one until the end. And what I like about this is kind of like the stoplight reading is I can see where each one of my students are at. When I get these packets back, I see this set of kids started on the very first easiest one. Either they really didn't understand it, they lacked confidence in their abilities. But then I see a whole group of students who started like on the third, or maybe even the second or the third version. And some maybe went right for the last version and could do it from the last version. So it allows me again to provide scaffolding for all of my students, differentiated instruction to meet them where they're at. Another way to do this is to reverse scaffold an item. So if I want to take a piece of authentic literature, let's just say, for example, an excerpt from Don Quixote. We know that no middle school student can read Don Quixote. I know my native speaker friend that we go to dinner every Friday. We have a little Spanish group that goes to dinner every Friday. She's taking a class, and Don Quixote is the subject, and she's a native speaker from Argentina, and the class is kicking her butt. So if it's hard for her, can you imagine what it'd be like for middle school students? They just can't do it. But it's such a beautiful piece of literature, and it permeates, even in American culture, there are references to this novel. So I might choose one particular scene, and I have the original, and I'm going to work backwards. I'm going to take that original, and I'm going to simplify it to 5 sentences, just the action. and then I'm going to slowly add words until I get to the original version. So it may take us 15 versions to get to there because that's really old, difficult Spanish. But my kids are getting experience with the language and they're being exposed to the culture and authentic piece of literature. We do this with a legend in my level 2s. We read a legend, what's it called? El Quetzal no se muere nunca, I think is what it's called. The Quetzal never dies. And it's a legend about how the Quetzal bird, which is a big, bright green bird with a long, colorful tail, a white chest with a red patch on the chest, how this bird became, and it's a Guatemalan legend about a son of a chief of these indigenous people. He got hunted down. His name was Quetzal. He was predicted to be able to live forever. There was a conflict. He got shot, and he died in the grass. And how he lived immortally, the gods turned him into this bird. He got the green for his body from the grass that he laid in, and the blood from his wound in his chest became that red patch on the chest of the bird, and then the sun gave him the long plumage for the tails. So we read this, and it takes me 3 versions for them to get to the actual native speaker version. There's only a few vocabulary words that they wouldn't know naturally. They're really unusual words, not common words at all, in the final version. And many of my kids could read the final version right off the bat, but I don't want to scare them off. So we start with a simpler version, then we read the second version, and then we can read the final version. And they're really proud when I go, this last version is the actual version that the kids would have read in their Spanish class in Spanish-speaking countries, like you read in your English class. So it's really, they really feel proud when they can do that. So the embedded readings are another fun activity to do. You can have kids illustrate chunks that they understand. They can make little storyboards for a chapter. Another activity is what's called a smash doodle. You can look that up. I don't have time to go over it specifically in complete detail. But a smash doodle is a mixture of text and pictures that depict either the whole story or a portion of the story, like a chapter. And they might put down things like, draw an image or find an image that depicts the main idea of this chapter. Write 3 vocabulary words and what they mean that you learned from this chapter you didn't know before, and draw pictures of them. Find 3 sentences in the chapter that tell what happened in the chapter. You draw those out, and then you have a reflection piece where it says, I learned that, or I already knew that, or something to that effect. They fill in these, and they're in the target language. So it's a way of taking text from taking text out of the text, rearranging it with illustrations to show comprehension at a deeper level. So those are just some activities. There are tons of different activities that you can do with reading. Search up, even use English websites to find out what English teachers use and see how you can adapt those or simplify those, or even go to elementary school sites and find things that they do. Because remember, our kids are like kindergartners, first graders, and second graders, even though they might be 9th, 10th, and 11th graders in class. In the second language, they're more like kindergarten or first graders and second graders. So you might go back and see those different types of things. Graphic organizers, another great idea. All of these things. And whenever I'm desperate for an idea, I will shoot down on the web and start looking for different reading activities. I usually put in there with elementary reading activities just to find things that are more simple for my kids to do, find creative ways to do things, and it gets really, really interesting. Some things you can also do is you can have kids create a text message interview with a character. So, they're already texting, but this is on a piece of paper. They will make little bubbles and they can text message each other back and forth. them playing themselves and interviewing the character. Lots of different things that kids can do with reading and making it more valuable for them, so they really get engaged with the text and acquire as much language as possible. So we are just at our hour mark. Thank you so much for sticking with me this evening. I hope you got some things out of this. If you did, please like and subscribe. As I said, we are trying to climb up to our milestone of 500 subscribers, so hopefully we'll get there pretty soon. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. If you are watching the replay, please add your comments, questions in the comment section. I do go back and read through these and answer them for you, so I appreciate that for those who are watching on the replay. I hope you all learned something. I'm not sure yet, but I think next week's topic will be Picture Talk at the same time, same channel, 5 p.m. Pacific time. You are so welcome, Catalina. I'm so glad to see you back with us. I hope this Back to Basics series has helped you go back to the fundamentals. If you missed any of these, feel free to go back. They're on YouTube. You can go to mm.us/YouTube to get to my page. There's the site. And you can see all of the previous ones. This is episode 18. We almost did a half a year's worth. Bernadette, thank you for these live sessions. Scott, so appreciate I'm always learning something. Awesome. I'm so glad to help you out, Bernadette. And with that, I wish everybody a great evening. I hope everybody who celebrated Thanksgiving had a great time with family and friends. And I wish everybody to have an awesome upcoming week. And I will see you again back on Monday next week. Have a good week, everybody.